What if I told you that one of the most controversial thinkers of all time, a man born over 200 years ago, may have predicted the rise of Elon Musk, Google, and ChatGPT? A man whose ideas would go on to shape nations, divide populations, and inspire revolutions. To some, he is a hero of the working class. To others, a dangerous radical. But what were his ideas? And why do they still ignite debate over a century after his death? This is the incredible story of history's most powerful man with no army, no fortune, and no throne. This is a story of Karl Marx, the most dangerous philosopher of all time. Karl Marx was born in the small town of Trier in 1818, but he actually wasn't born into poverty. In fact, his family was relatively well off. His father was a lawyer and his mother was a homemaker. He was born one of 9 children, but life in the 19th century was hard, and sadly, only 5 would live to see adulthood. As Karl grew, Europe was transforming before his eyes. For hundreds of years, people had lived as farmers in rural villages, but then came the Industrial Revolution, and everything changed. Factories rose like weeds in the cities, and people moved here in search of work, opportunity, and the chance to put food on their table. But what they instead found was a dystopian nightmare. Cramped and overcrowded factories, air thick with dust and smoke, 14-hour days with dangerous machinery, ready to tear you apart with a single misstep, and the payoff, wages that barely kept you alive. A world where progress came with a price tag of human misery. This disturbed the now adult Karl, as he noticed that it wasn't laziness that kept the workers poor. It was design, a system built to funnel wealth to the elite while keeping the poor in place. These were the horrors of capitalism, and Marx wondered, was there a system that could work for everyone instead of just the few? And so he started writing. And in 1848, Marx published the Communist Manifesto, a book you have probably heard about, as the title still echoes through the generations. In it, Marx divides the people into 2 groups: the bourgeois, the owners of factories, land, and business who reap all the rewards, and the proletariat, the working class who is forced to sell their labor to survive. But what would happen if the workers collectively owned the factories and the businesses they worked in? They could put in the labor and reap all the rewards for their hard work. This is the essential idea of Marxism. But there was also a darker side to the manifesto. Marx and Engels argued that change could not be achieved peacefully. It would require revolution, and not just taking the factories from the owners, but also overthrowing entire governments. The following years, Marx would go on to get exiled from Prussia, France, and Belgium, but it actually wasn't because of the manifesto. In Prussia, he worked as a journalist and wrote articles criticizing the monarchy. In France, he associated with socialist groups. In Belgium, he continued his political activism by organizing communists. He finally settled in England, where life quickly turned dark. Marx lived in extreme poverty, forced to rely on funds from friends. It got so bad that Marx had to pawn possessions just to feed his family. During this time, Marx had to bury 4 of his children, possibly as a result of the poor living conditions. This deeply affected Marx, but even in struggle, he kept writing, pouring everything into a massive work that would define his life, Das Kapital. In it, he warned that the gap between rich and poor would widen, that companies would get so big that they would become monopolies, and that machines would replace human labor. Were these just lucky guesses, or was he onto something? Marx died on the 14th of March, 1883, at the age of 64. He was buried in an unremarkable grave, and the funeral was only attended by a small number of people. He died poor, stateless, lonely, with his work having had little impact on the general public. That is, until a few decades later, when his theories would be revived and inspire revolutions. Stalin, Mao, Castro, all claiming that they were fulfilling Marx's vision. Many communist states rose and seized power through revolutions, just like the Communist Manifesto had told them decades earlier. But here's a twist. Marx envisioned a stateless, classless society. What instead emerged were brutal regimes that replaced one ruling class with another, leading to the deaths of millions of people through starvation, imprisonment, or killing. The spread and influence of communism would go on to dominate much of the 20th century, as communism and capitalism clashed time and time again during the Cold War. But that's a story for another day. Karl Marx was not perfect. He didn't have all the answers, but he gave a voice to the people history often ignores and dared to believe the world could belong to them. And whether you see him as a prophet, threat, genius, radical, hero, or villain, one thing is certain. His ideas still inspire and strike fear into the hearts of men, and will continue to do so for a very long time. His legacy isn't about tearing down capitalism, but rather about asking the one question we still avoid: what happens when the system finally eats itself?